Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the first workshop of the Go Deep project on digital IP and data agreements. Before giving the floor to Luca Mion from Innovazione Trentino, I would like to link the Vevox app, okay, that will enable the interactions throughout all the workshop. So please connect on the vevox.app link and insert the ID or use the QR code. So Luca Mion, I give you the floor for a brief introduction.
Thank you, Stefano. Good morning, welcome to everyone from me. Okay, we know more or less each other, so a few words about Innovazione Trentino. We are a technology transfer organization, so a regional technology transfer organization. So intellectual property, of course, is at the core of our daily job, and that's why one of the reasons why we are running several initiatives and projects around topics involving intellectual property. In particular, here today, we know the reason why we wanted to develop this with project partners. Of course, this Go Deep project is that you know that the protection of IP in general has always been challenging, and in particular, SMEs and very often researchers and innovators struggle with IP management in the context of digital and data. So that's why for us this is a very important project. We will have on board also experts like Margherita Cera, lawyer that will have a speech afterwards, and other experts, of course, in the roundtable will bring expertise, different views and angles. And this is the first workshop. We will have additional 2 workshops, and we will have a final event, of course, where we will try to summarize all the things that we are developing within the project. So I want to thank the project partners, Jožef Stefan Institute and Innosquare. Thanks again to Margherita Cera, lawyer, for support for the speech. Thanks to the participants to the roundtable, and thanks to Elisa and Stefan, of course, for the management of the project and for organization of the workshop. So wish you a great workshop and look forward to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. So we can start immediately with a brief introduction of the Go Deep project. So Go Deep project is an InnoSoup 5 project with the duration of 1 year, from March 2020 to February 2021. Partners are, as said Luca, the Jožef Stefan Institute from Ljubljana, Innovazione Trentino from Trento in Italy, and Innosquare from Switzerland. The budget of the project is 50 €, and the output attended from the results of the project are a design option paper and 3 thematic workshops. The Go Deep project insists on 3 main work topics, of which each of them will be the subject of a dedicated workshop. The first one is the legal aspect of digital IP and data management. There is the digital IP and data agreements and contracts. And finally, the digital IP and data exploitation strategies. The outreach of the project aims to reach 60 SMEs with 36 cases analyzed, a peer learning activity that is supported by 9 experts, 3 per each partner, the creation of 3 workshops, and a questionnaire. In particular, the questionnaire is still open and available for you to participate in. So if you are a company, we highly encourage and thank you for participating in that. Up to now, we have 36 small medium enterprises participating in it. And in this questionnaire, we go to ask some questions related to the IP, digital IP management, and the open points that we are going to exploit during project activities in order to understand which are the needs and the possible campaign activities to be proposed to small medium enterprises. So let's go a little bit to some example of this question with some of the outputs we reached up to now. The first question is about the license agreements. So do you ever had to draw up a license agreement for software use or data transfer and use agreements? So for example, here we have that most of our companies that participated are supplier of this digital IP, and some of them as a customer. Then, for example, another question is, does your company use digital data and as commercial product services? So if their business model is related to data or digital IP in general, and most of these companies indicated that it is not, but a large part confirmed that. Then we asked also, for example, what kind of support would you need in preparing the contracts for software and data? This part is particularly interesting for this workshop. So we can see that the first point is templates and guidelines for drafting contracts, legal support for drafting the contracts, understanding and evaluating the value of the data portfolio and software IP, knowing the rights and obligation with respect to data usage, due diligence and software disclosure, patentability of my software. As we can see, one of the output of the project will be dedicated to this, in particular to the first aspect. So we collect some information useful to support the companies in this task. Finally, in your opinion, which of the following information should not be missing from software licenses agreement or data transfer and use agreements? So we have a broad response to this question. In particular, we just listed some of the possible topics that are quite simple, but for example, the name of the parties, the liability for misuse, the time limitation and boundary of the contract, and the source of data, for example, and so on. Finally, after this review of some of the results of the question, that is, I remember you still open and still you are completely welcome to participate in that. We can come back to the workshop agenda. So the part that concluded now is the welcome and introduction to the project. Now, next, there will be the keynote speech from Margherita Cera, that is a lawyer at Rödl and partner in Italy and expert in industrial and intellectual property law, that will be followed by the roundtable, and finally a workshop, an interactive workshop, where we will discuss and prepare a checklist for digital IP contracts and agreements. Finally, I remember you the 2 dates of the next workshop. The second workshop will be on legal aspects of digital IP and data management on 26th of November 2021, and the final one will be the data-driven innovation and exploitation on 7 December 2021. So now I'm really happy to leave the floor to our legal expert, Margherita Cera. So I just interrupt my presentation. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefano. I share my presentation. Okay, do you see the presentation? Can you confirm?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you. So I really thank you, all the staff of IT Innovazione Trentino for the invitation and for the great project. I thanks also the other partner of it in this project. I think that it's a very, very important issues. The one of the managing digital intellectual property in manufacturing small and medium enterprises, digitalization processes. During this year, we can observe a very increased use of digital technologies in business. Digital technologies actually enable business to gain competitive advantage, to expand their markets, because digital technology break down all the geographical barriers, so they allow the internationalization of businesses. But digital technology enable companies also to improve their services. Unfortunately, often the digital transformation processes do not care enough about the legal framework and the legal issues related to this kind of digital transformation processes. In Europe, a small and medium enterprises is an enterprises with a number of workers between 10 and 249, and with a turnover less than 50 million euros per year. So this is the target of this project and of my speech. I think it could be interesting to see in Europe which are the most digitalized countries. In particular, the Digital Economy and Society Index shows that the most digitalized countries are actually Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and Netherlands. In order to achieve these results, the Digital Economic and Society Index regards some index like human capital, connectivity, integration of digital technology, and digital public services, where human capital measure the skill needed to take advantage of the possibilities offered by the digital society. The connectivity measures the development of broadband, its quality, and the access made by various stakeholders. The integration of digital technology measures the digitalization of companies and the use of the online channels for sale. And finally, the digital public services measures the digitalization of the public administration. It is also interesting to see that in 2020, it has very increased the number of patents filed in the various areas of new technology. For instance, the new technology are mostly used in the medical field, but also in digital communication, computer technologies, in biotechnologies, whereas the patent filed in the traditional areas like transport or other special machines are decreased during 2020s. It shows that the use of digital technologies is more and more important in the development of the European businesses. Here you can see which are the companies which have filed the patent requested. You can see Samsung, Huawei, LG, and other important companies. Of course, these are not medium and small enterprises, are huge enterprises. So it would be interesting to know if the small and medium enterprises knows the instrument to protect their invention and their new technology. For this reason, I think that it's very important to manage IP rights in digitalization process. why intellectual property rights are important in this kind of process of the enterprises. Because often the new technologies involves items which could be the object of an intellectual property rights. In particular, we can think about the source code of software, all the related invention, and finally, all the data that could be collected by means of new technologies. All these items, so source code, invention, and data, could be covered, could be protected by means of intellectual properties rights. In particular, the source code of software could be protected by means of copyright according to the European Directive 2009 number 24 on the legal protection of computer programs. In accordance with this directive, all the member states should protect computer programs by copyright as literary works. This means that the software are protected in Europe like poems. I know that it's quite strange, and then if we have the time, we will focus about the reason of this choice of the European legislator. Anyway, source code could be protected as literary works. The condition for the protection is that the computer program is original in the sense that it is the author's own intellectual creation. No other criteria shall be applied to determine if the software is eligible for protection. The copyright grants an exclusive right to the owner, and this exclusive right is the right to do or to authorize the permanent or the temporary reproduction of a computer program by any means and in any form, in part or in a whole, insofar as loading, displaying, running, transmission or storage of the computer program necessitate such reproduction should be authorized by the right holder. The exclusive right conferred by copyright is also the exclusive right to translate, adapt, arrange the software without prejudice to the right of the person who alters the program, which could be also different from the owner of the software, the original software. Then the copyright grants to the right holder also the exclusive right to distribute to the public the software, so to sell, to put the software in the market. These rights last 70 years after the author's death, and it is recognized all over the world. Of course, it's therefore very important to know who is the ownership of the software. Also, in order to know if it is possible to use a software, to implement a software within a new technology, a new machine. Well, the copyright, the right holder of the copyright is usually the natural person who created the program, but if this person is an employee which have created the computer program in the execution of his duties or following the instruction given by his employer, well, the employer is the owner of the copyrights. We have not special provision for researcher or university. So the ownership of the software created by, for instance, a university researcher should be regulated in the research contract. It's very important, this aspect, for all the university and the researchers. The invention, even those concerns digital technologies, could be protected by patent. A patent may be granted for inventions which are new, which involve an inventive step, and which are suitable for industrial application. But not all the software-related invention could be protected by patent. In particular, the Article 52 of the European Patent Convention stated that software shall not be regarded as invention, but only to the extent to which the European patent application relates to such subject matter or activities as such. So the software as such could not be regarded as an invention. But the guideline, actually, as I have stated before, the software as such could be protected by means of copyright. But in some hypotheses, the copyright protection could be cumulated with the patent protection. The guidelines of the European Patent Convention stated that a computer program played by itself is not patentable, but it is claimed with its technical contribution to the known art, then the patentability could be granted. The patent could be granted. Therefore, a software, in order to be patented, should achieve a technical contribution in more than the instruction that the machine, that the software could provide to the machine. For instance, this means, for example, that the program-controlled machine and program-controlled manufacturing and control processes should normally be regarded as patentable subject matter, because, of course, in these cases, the software makes a technical contribution to the known art. It's not limited to giving the instruction to the machine. There is another effect. So in this case, the protection provided by copyright could be cumulated with the protection provided by patent. The protection provided by patent gives to the right holder the exclusive right to authorize the implementation, the reproduction, and any form of distribution of the patent. This protection lasts 1 year, but it could be renewed for 20 times, so for a total of 20 years. Of course, this kind of rights is very important for companies because it grants an exclusive right, a sort of monopoly on the exploitment of the invention. The patent, different from the software, grants protection only in relation with the territories where the patent has been registered. So before to file a patent application, it is very important to have an idea about the markets where the invention will be exploited, will be sold, in order to establish a sort of strategy of protection for the invention. For instance, if we are an Italian manufacturer and we intend to sell products in USA, well, the patent application should be filed also in USA. The patent ownership is a little bit more complicated than the ownership of the copyright. The Italian law, so in this case I refer just to national law, if the inventor is a freelancer, where the inventor, and so the natural person, will be the owner of the patent. If the invention has been achieved by an employee, and it has been achieved during the execution of an employee contract, which has the inventive activity within the scope of the employment contract. So the invention will belong to the employer. The employer will be the owner of the patent, and the employee has no right to exploit the invention. The invention belongs to the employer. But if the invention has been achieved not in the execution of a contract where the inventive activity was within the scope of the contract, in this case, the invention belongs to the employer, who becomes the owner of the patent. But in this case, the employee has the right to an equitable price, because in this case, it is deemed that the employee has not received a payment for its inventive activity. Different is the case of the invention provided by the university researcher or of the researcher of the public administration with research purposes. In this case, the patent, the invention, belongs to the natural person, so to the researcher itself, but the university or the public administration has the right to a fee, a royalty on the exploitation of the invention. So also in the case of the ownership of the patent, it is very important to establish by contract the ownership of the intellectual property rights. Then we have seen that also data could be an issue very important in the technology digitalization processes. The data are relevant as such because every single data could be protected, for instance, because it could be a personal data, but it could be protected also because it could be an industrial data, so it could be a confidential information or a trade secrets. But data are protected also if considered altogether in whole. In this case, the European Directive number 9 of 1996 on the legal protection on database protect actually the databases without prejudice to the protection of the single data. In particular, the legal protection of database conferred by the directive grants to the maker of a database, so pay attention, the rights is conferred to the maker of the database, not to the inventor of the data. In this case, the creation of the data is not important. What is important is the collection of such data. So the exclusive right conferred by the directive is conferred to the maker of database. Which are the conditions? The maker receive these exclusive rights if he can show that there has been a qualitative or a quantitatively substantial investment in either the obtaining of the data, the verification of the data, or the presentation of the data, not on the creation on data. So if we suffered a huge investment in the creation of data, it does not matter to the end of the legal protection of database. What is important is the investment in obtaining such data. So if, for instance, the maker has paid who has created the data to obtain such data. These exclusive rights confers to the maker the right to prevent third party from the extraction or the reutilization of the whole or of a substantial part of the contents of the database. The legal protection of database lasts for 15 years from the 1st of January of the year following the date of the completion of the databases. Well, we are arrived to the exploitation of the intellectual property rights, and so to the last part of my speech. Then we will have a workshop where we will focus on the exploitation and on the contracts and the contract clauses for the exploitation of intellectual property rights. But I would like to anticipate to you that all the intellectual property rights which I have spoken about, so copyright on software, patent on invention, database, even trade secrets, could be exploited by the owner. How? The owner, the right holder, could assign the right to third party or could license this right to third party. The license could be a traditional license or an open license. A traditional license means, for instance, that for software, the owner will not share the source code. In the open source licensing, the source code will be shared. The actual systems, in the actual systems, it has been developed a lot of scheme for the license also for the open data. In this case, the license grants the licensee the right to extract the data. In case of open licensing, I would like to precise that in this case, the data or the software or the other items protected are not without an owner. There is an owner, there is a right holder, which grants a special license, granting a particular freedom to the users. So the choice between granting a traditional licensing or an open licensing is a nectar of strategies for companies and for businesses, of course. And even maybe an ethical question, because of course the intellectual property rights arise some problems regarding the possibility of the society to have access to data, to information, to knowledge, etc. Before to start the roundtable, I would like also to point the attention on how could be the contractual relation in a usual project of digital transformation of an enterprise. In these cases, you could see some stakeholders, usually the producer, the manufacturers of goods, for instance, a provider, which could be a researcher or a software house, which provide to the manufacturer the software or other cloud computing services, for instance. Then we have the end user of the products, which has become smart products thanks to the intervention of the provider. And then we have often also some intermediaries, person who install or who give the maintenance on the products. All this relationship between these stakeholders could strongly change if the producer implement a digital transformation process. Because of course, if the product became a smart product, the producer, but also the provider and also the intermediaries could know some data about, for instance, the uses that the end consumer made of the products. All this relationship, of course, should be regulated very carefully, but we will see all these aspects later. I think that now it's time for the roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Margherita, for your extremely interesting speech. I think now we could, before starting the roundtable and giving the floor to Elisa, we have some some questions from the audience. Elisa, great. Okay, so the first question for you is, if a software is developed by more than one person, particularly many researchers with different contracts typology, how can I identify who owns it?
Well, usually if there are more than one person who developed the software belongs to all these persons. So the software is a so-called collective works. But it is always possible to regulate the ownership with the contract, for instance, providing that the intellectual property rights belongs to just one person, the director of the researches, for instance. But of course, it should be regulated before the researches starts.
Okay, thank you. Then we can go with the second. If I am the owner, all or part of a software or data, how do I claim my right against whoever is using this software or data?
You can file a pursuit before the judicial authority. This is the basically systems. You have a different action at your disposal. You can obtain a provisional measure in order to stop the counterfeiter to use your software or your data, or you can file an ordinary judgment in order to obtain also the damages that you have suffered because of the of your software and data.
Okay. This question is, I know, particularly critical. And what about the IP of software generated by artificial intelligence?
Wow, this is a question that merits an entire workshop, actually. Well, the software generated by artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence actually could be an inventor, could be an author, but for the moment, the European courts, the European Patent Office, for instance, has denied that the machine could be the owner of the intellectual property rights. This is an issue that involves our entire legal system, because our legal system is not ready to recognize rights to machine, to subject difference from natural person or juridical person. So for the moment, the creation created by the artificial intelligence could not be protected. Also, the European Patent Office of the United States last year issues a decision where it has denied, for instance, the patentability of an invention created by the artificial intelligence for the same reasons. So for this moment, the software, but all the other creation of the artificial intelligence could not be protected or could not be protected. The only protection is the one on the software of the artificial intelligence. So the owner of the software and the artificial intelligence, of course, could exploit the creation of the artificial intelligence, but no rights could be granted to the artificial intelligence itself.
Okay, thank you. Extremely interesting and really,
yeah, this is a very interesting
topic. Okay, so we have, I think, the last question. If a technology is protected by a patent, how can I license it?
You can license it with different kind of contracts, for instance, technology transfer contracts or license contracts. then during the workshop we will see some possibilities, but it is just a contract in which the owner of the patent allows third party to use the technology, to use the patent within a special territories in an exclusive way or not, against a payment or not. It depends. There are a lot of possibilities.
Okay. And then a final question, I think, what kind of license do you suggest to apply in order to increase the value of the software? I think it's quite a tricky question, this one.
Yeah, it's a little bit generic because, of course, it depends on the business model of the company which have developed the software. Usually, it could be an open license, which has some advantages. For instance, the possibility to implement the software. But of course, if your booth is to gain a traditional license with a royalties for the use.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we answered all the questions and we are perfectly on time. So I'm really pleased to give the floor to Elisa. That will be our we will manage our roundtable for today.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I maybe can ask Stefano if you can share.
Sure.
And switch on your microphone. So I'm very happy to be here and to moderate this roundtable with very interesting people participating, and the role of this discussion here is the scope of this discussion here is to highlight the role of contracts and agreements in the digital IP and data exploitation in the digitalization processes. So what we want to achieve today is to have a different perspective and different perspective coming from different aspects of different sectors of people that are really using agreements or working with digital IP and data. So I'm very happy to have here in the alphabetic order you can see in this slide, Dr. Maja Bogataj Jancic, founder of CEO of the Intellectual Property Institute. I kindly ask you when I call you to switch on your camera. And
hello to everyone.
Hi Maja, nice to meet you.
Hi Elisa, hi to everyone. Nice to be here on the Friday afternoon.
Yes, so we have the weekend after, so we can relax after that. Secondly, we have Giovanni Gaglione, that is the CTO and co-founder of Wonderflow. That is a scale-up companies that is here in Innovazione Trentino and is working with the voice of customer analytics. Then Giovanni, I don't know if you can switch on your camera or yes, it's already in. Okay, great.
Hi everyone, very nice to meet you. As Elisa said, I'm CTO and co-founder of Wonderflow. Wonderflow works with leading brands in the world to analyze public and private data. So I'm here especially to give some insights or some help on the data agreements.
Thank you very much. And then we have Carlo Pasqualetto, the CEO and co-founder of AzzurroDigitale, that is a company that provide consultancies and software for the Industry 4.0.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Hello, Elisa.
Nice to meet you. And then we have Romana Schwab, the project manager at ITG Salzburg, the innovation agency in Salzburg, and is expert in strategic consulting of funding program on intellectual property and IP strategy. Hi, Romana.
Hi, hello from Salzburg.
Hello. And then finally, we have John Whelam, the ICT Research Commercialization Manager at Trinity College Dublin. Is very expert in technology transfer and commercialization of ICT. Hi, John.
Hello, hi everybody. Delighted to be here. Thanks for asking me. So greetings from the fringes of Western Europe in the North Atlantic.
Thank you to be here, John. It's very pleasure to be here. So I think we can start. I will ask you, sorry, I will ask you a couple of questions to each of you, and I ask you to be quite to respect the time for the first round of questions. So we will have up to 7 minutes, and for the second one, 5 minutes each. So just I want to start. So I want just to know your perspective. I want to ask you to introduce yourself, what you are doing, and with regards to the IP agreements and digital IP. And I want to know your perspective, since you come from really different point of views. So I won't go in the alphabetic order. So I will start with the Romana. I think we can close the sharing of the screen, so we can look at in our face, also in that remotely. I'm sorry for that. And I want to ask you, Romana, what is the role of an innovation agency like ATG in the IP management agreements in the digitalization processes? What are the main problems that you face and the best practice that you want to share?
Yay, a warm welcome from Salzburg, from home office. We're closing down right now again. Well, the Innovation Agency of Salzburg, maybe Elisa, I have some slides.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You're sure, you're right.
Especially, I love the first one, the first slide.
Yes, I'll do soon.
A little bit nicer.
Just a second. Okay, I can do that. Okay.
Okay, now everyone knows where I'm from Salzburg.
Yes,
welcome from the city of Mozart. Okay, well, I'm from the Innovation and Technology Transfer Agency of the region of Salzburg. We have 2 departments: a location service to promote strategic thematic topics like life sciences, creative industry, smart materials, and so on. And I work in the department Business Services, where we support regional companies in accessing funding, knowledge around IPR, and finding partners, technology transfer. And there is one thing which is really important. We are a non-profit organization, and we offer free and pre-competitive services. Always remember that later on. The next, please. Next slide.
Is next?
Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Don't worry.
Well, what do we offer in the fields of IPR? Well, naturally, we are kind of a funnel. We are the first contact point for IPR advice in Salzburg, for mature companies, for startups, for universities, and so on. We offer consultation days with experts in the fields of patents and trademarks. We are in a close cooperation with the Patent Office. We are a PatLib and also an EN, a network member. And we cooperate close with regional stakeholders like, well, the Austrian Patent Office, like the Austrian Research Promotion Agency, and so on. We offer their IPR analysis in cooperation, patent checks, and so on. And that's really important, the cooperation with our IP experts. Next one. Well, in the field of digital IP and data agreements, we reflect reflect the IP-related risks and opportunities in a kind of pre-diagnosis, as we are pre-competitive, and that's the point. We have a huge network of IP experts we can offer to the SMEs, to the companies, and we have access to model contracts which you can offer the SMEs. And I want to emphasize, our service never replaces the service of professional representatives, such as lawyers and patent attorneys. That's, for us, it's really important. And we don't serve to draft intellectual property right applications or IP-related contracts. Yeah, we are really kind of funnel for all the questions around digital IP. We work a lot with business model canvases, business model development with the companies. We have the fundings for that, the subsidies for them. And that's for us the most important things. We are we work in a key accounting system, and we are really accompanying the companies and SMEs over a long period of time. And at last, what are the benefits for the companies? It's the last. Yeah, they get more awareness around IP and IP management. And they get it, what's really important, they get a clearer picture with all these different tools and of things we offer to them and the contacts. And they get a better understanding about the different IP components, which were just, we heard from the speaker before, and how to put them together to a real brick wall to protect the business model itself, especially the new digital business models. Good, that's from my side. Later on, I have a best practice example. Just tell me if you want to hear it.
Yes, I will ask this later on. What are the main problems that why companies are addressing you for this IP management? What are the main problems and challenges that are?
Well, the most important question I always am asked, I want to patent my trademark. Well, that's the real beginning. They want to protect something, but they don't know how. They don't know the tools, they don't know these bricks, and we just guide them through in a very low level. Yeah, we are really face to face with them. We are now not an authority, and we speak their language. I think that's really important. Yeah, that's really give them a direct answer, a simple answer in their language.
Yes, the role of intermediaries in this case is very important to speak the same languages.
Yeah.
Here we have today we have companies and we have other intermediaries that do the same. So we can listen from different perspectives on this. That is very important for today, but also for the work that we are doing in the GoD project. Thank you, Romana, for the moment. I give the floor to Giovanni Gaglione. Giovanni Gaglione, Wonderflow is really working with data. And so data are your business model. And you told me when we met that you are doing a lot of agreements and contracts also with big players. So what does it mean to work with data, and what is the main difficulties, or maybe not difficulties, but the main characteristics of doing agreements with such big players? I know that you have a presentation, so if you want to share your screen with your presentation, you're free to do.
Sure, give me 1 second. Let me find the button. Should be this one, yes. Okay. Can you see my screen?
It's coming.
With the presentation?
Oh, I can just see, I think, your email.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Then let me
not
choose the best option. 1 second. Let's do this. There we go. Yes. Now you should see my presentation, right?
Yes, I see in his PowerPoint mode,
Perfect.
but okay.
So, we exactly we work with many brands, and of course there are difficulties as well. There are best practices that simplify working with customers when data are involved. Of course, the priority for brands is to protect the data, both personal data, but also public data, especially when from public data you extract informations that are sensitive for the customers. No, in our case, we extract insights to improve products and services on a global scale. So of course, they want this data to be protected. On the other side, what they want to make sure is that they need to be compliant with law. Laws often, when you work on a global scale, with the law involved in many different countries, so it's their priority to make sure that things are in place to match these two requirements. Challenges are especially when customers are not well educated or they don't have much experience with data. As we know, we are in a digital transformation, and so there are usually two groups of clients, customers. A group of customers that already had the experience of working with data, so they already have best practices in place and it's easier to work with them. On the other side, there are customers that are starting to analyze data from public or private data, and therefore they have more challenges to work with, especially because they don't have enough confidence coming from using best practices. Therefore, the process is a bit slower when you want to set up a project with them. And of course, the key is to educate them, show them which are the international standards, which are the measures for matching the best practices on a global scale for making sure these two requirements are satisfied. Let's say, starting from the conditions, we can say that the world got globalization while the law didn't yet. And this is one of the main source of challenges, especially imagine you are an organization working in the Italian market, so you target all Italian companies, but then one of those Italian companies has a global market. In that case, for example, it can be very challenging to understand which is the applicable law. Probably, of course, the Italian law applies, but probably that organization, that customer has customers all over the world. And so suddenly your organization needs to know how those laws apply and how they work. When you want to understand how they work, it's not easy to do. Imagine you need to comply with Chinese law. Are there easy way to understand how Chinese law work? Most likely there aren't many places where you can access easy to read documentation and easy to understand. Sometimes it's also languages barriers. You want to get a summary, but it's quite challenging. You will need to really read the law written in a different alphabet and with the legal language. You need also people that should be skilled to evaluate how the law works, but also if your company is doing keeping the compliances on a frequent basis, because probably you are setting up new projects, your operations run, and you need to make sure that your employees are matching this compliance, and finding these people that has this background, that knows, that has this international experience is of course not very easy. To add even more complexity is the fact that often there are APIs or public data sets. You can use these tools to share the data. But as we know, public data are growing and growing. And there is something called the scraping, that is a way to access public data less in a structured way. And that poses even more challenges because there is no authority that regulates that. Often the law in that is very young. In every country it might be a little bit different, and therefore when a customer wants to work with this type of data sharing, for example, if they are even if they are educated, they start to they don't have point of reference to use to understand very well how this data sharing works and if this is compliant with the laws and which laws it is compliant with. So this is the complexity that creates the context. Of course, likely there are also best practices that for especially those customers that are used to work with them simplify a lot, because there is already some education on both sides, on our side and on their side, that simplify the collaboration. So best practices often are based on one setting, for which there is a data controller that is usually who is the owner of the data or who collects the data and manage the data, making sure that they are well stored, that they are secure, and so on. Often they also have analysis capabilities, but often they need to delegate the analysis of this data because they might miss some capabilities. Imagine a brand like TomTom, Philips, they sell products all around the world, they collect feedback, they collect call center calls from their call centers, indeed, they collect feedback from their website. So in this case, data are owned by the customers, by the consumers, but they are managing those data. On the other side, they need to delegate the analysis of this data, and that's why there are data processors. In this case, Wonderflow is the data processor. So the data processor usually works on behalf of the data controller. So it takes this data and it cannot do actions that are not agreed with the data controller. He can do the data processing only within a certain specific scope that was agreed with the data controller. He needs to make sure that he has the permission to analyze these the data coming from the data controllers. And often they also might have sub-processors. So that even add sometimes more complexity, given that the data processors might be more than one in this case. And there is a whole chain of data processors that needs to be verified in order to make sure that the data agreement is effective. Here on the slide, you find some of the main points of the data agreement that is usually used between a data processor and a data controller. I don't know if we have time to go one by one. We can do that very quickly if you want to. Do we have time, Elisa?
Just if you go very quickly, I think it's very important, this part.
Okay, so usually these are the clauses starting from compliance with applicable laws. Of course, the data processor, in this case, for example, Wonderflow, needs to show how they are compliant with the applicable laws. So first of all, you need to identify the applicable laws, and then you need to show how you are compliant, which measures you are putting in place to be compliant. Personnel related means that when you set up a project analyzing data, of course, you have many people involved, and you need to make sure that these people is well trained to keep data secure, to keep processes compliant with the applicable laws. This means that as a data processor, you need to show that you have measures in place to select, onboard, and train your personnel so that all the agreement can be satisfied. Appropriate measures for security. This is probably the easiest one. Of course, if you need to manage data of a data controller, you need to show which measures are in place for keeping them secure. Sub-processors, usually there is a list of sub-processors that needs to be declared. This list is reviewed and also approved by the data controller. And you need to also make sure that each sub-processor is subject to the same clauses of this data agreement. In this way, the whole chain is satisfying this data agreement. And of course, this needs to be transparent to the data controller. Transparency, of course, is a key element in this case. Handling of data subject rights means that the processor might be affected by requests by the data subjects. The data subjects in this case are the consumers. No? Imagine a Wonderflow analyzed data for the consumers. They might receive a request from the consumers. It's very unlikely that this happens, but in some case that might happen. And given that the consumers have direct relationship with the data controller, of course, the data processor needs to also in this case act on behalf of the data controller. So there must be coordination. There must be a certain of actions that need to be agreed with the data controller. Data breach, imagine a Wonderflow analyze private data of a big brand on the Wonderflow database. And of course, as it happens on the web, there might be a data breach. That means that there might be an hacker attacking the database and that might steal some data. In that case, there are standard procedures that are based mainly on 2 points. One is the notification of the data breach. In case somebody realizes there is a data breach, it needs to be notified to the data controller. And also there must be coordination on how to handle the data breach, how to notify the public authorities, how to notify the consumers and so on. Then data retention policy, basically, if you keep stored the data of the data controller, that means that after the contract terminates, you need to guarantee that those data either are deleted, either are returned to the data controller. Because otherwise, if the collaboration stops and you are still keeping access to those data, that is indeed a data breach. You don't have any more authorization to access those data, so you need to show that you are going to remove them or you are going to return to the customers, to the data controller in this case. Audit rights, that's also very important. So the data controller has rights to do audits to the data processor. That means that, for example, on a yearly basis, the data controller might go to the office of the data processors to double check that everything is in place, everything is working fine according to the best practices in security, according to this data agreement. Of course, I mean, it might be considered a bit unusual as a thing in the sense that it can be also expensive to spend 2 days with the customer, with the data controller to show that everything is working fine, but that's, of course, a very important element of transparency that guarantees that the data agreement is working fine. Finally, the data transfer. In the data agreements should be stated where data are stored and where they are transferred to. For example, if the data controller is European, usually the clause says that data cannot go outside of Europe. Imagine nowadays with globalization, with cloud providers, even servers can be everywhere in the world. You might have a server of the data processor that is in the United States. In that case, that server cannot be used because otherwise you are transferring the data outside of Europe. And this is just an example how also these clauses can determine very important aspects of the processes that a data processor needs to have, needs to handle.
Thank you very much. This is very relevant, Giovanni, for the agreements, so for the topic of today. So I want to go on if you want to stop the sharing of the screen so we can see. I want to ask Carlo Pasqualetto. We had now this presentation from Giovanni that talk about data and this also business to business, business to customer approach. You as AzzurroDigitale working a lot on business to business in the industry 4.0 approach, and so what I'm asking you is if you can talk about your role in this digitalization, and maybe tell us some warranties that are usually required by clients and the main fears that your customers can have approaching the digitalization process.
Thank you, Elisa. I'm really happy to take part at this interesting conversation. So I prepared a short deck that will, I hope, help me in sharing my thoughts regarding this interesting theme. Here you should see quite good the presentation. To the presentation. Yes. So we are AzzurroDigitale. We are an Italian startup, and our mission is to help manufacturing companies to do the so-called digital transformation. So it means that we work with partners side by side with the manufacturing company. This is our verticality, and we develop the so-called cyber physical platform, cyber physical system, where your mission is to gather data from manufacturing process, could be human or even, of course, machine, collect all of this data together, and then try to extract meaningful insights from this data. So our growth, I think, is important to underline this. We are growing pretty fast, but we don't have a really deep knowledge of all the data-related teams. And of course, when we started, we didn't know how important it is to focus on all the intellectual properties teams. So as a startup, you always think that everything is easy, but then when you start to work with the big companies, you understand that even if your product is quite good, or at least help the company to solve some of the issues, then you have another. Just to make you understand, we work with this type of manufacturing company, so usually quite large company who have a lot of compliance that you need to follow and to work on in order to make them allow you to work with their ECT system. Moreover, when you enter in their ecosystem, usually you develop a little part of application that helps a specific process to work better. But it's quite impossible that you arrive in a so-called greenfield. So your solution is put in an ecosystem of legacy ECT system that needs to talk with you, that need to exchange data, and maybe you also need to write on their ECT system. So this is again pretty tough. At the start for us it was from a technical point of view, but year after year is becoming every year more important, the intellectual property part, and of course your capacity to warrant and to protect, of course, the consistencies of the data that your client use and develops. So imagine a manufacturing world or a plant that need to be digitalized. So you have usually people that need to be scheduled to work in a facility that is a plant. Those people to work in that place need to be, of course, there, need to have the right skills to work in the specific place, and also need to have the health check. Let's say that the doctor allowed that specific blue collar to work on that position. Then you go to work in your workstation, and it's really common that you need to interact with the machine that you are working on. You can interact with automatic or semi-automatic machine, or you can interact with the organization through human, we call it with this working activity where you just have to use your hands, so it's normal labor, but of course you need to have all the information that you need to do the specific task. And then you have to gather all this information that, as you can see, are made by people, but also by machinery, collect all them and extract meaningful insights. So when we develop our platform to do this, I have two examples. This is a WMS, that is a platform to optimize the way I schedule my workforce in the plant. We had some problem with our clients. The first was, first of all, one of the big issue that our clients always ask us when we work on that is to have the possibility to prove in some way that our algorithms are correct. So we are planning a specific person, and we are using our algorithm to say that, for example, Carlo can work on that specific workstation. To do that, we use our algorithm, but the base of our calculation comes from data that the company already has on its databases. So we need to read those information, we need to elaborate this information, and then we have to share with our client on our platform. So the first problem that we have on that is that we have to certify that we will not create issues on the legacy databases, as Giovanni said before, and so we need to warn them from the fact that we do not influence the consistency of the data that they manage. So it's really common in our experience is that we have to show them really strong and quite expensive insurance that will make them know that if we read and maybe write on their databases, if we create problem, we have the capacity to pay back, of course, this problem. And then, of course, that we have the capacity to save in some way the information on the cloud that we use to do the calculation. And on that cloud, we have to show them and to make them sure that that information will not go out. So again, as Giovanni said, one of the questions that they always ask is where our physically the storage of the cloud that we use are located in the world. And of course, we usually have we are all in Europe in order to protect also the GDPR compliance and other facts. So from our experience, first of all, the data breach and the theme related to the fact of you have to really protect the consistency of the databases of your client is really important. This is one of the reasons why we don't want usually to manage our application on premises, but we always stay on cloud, so it's easy to show the passage of the data. Another thing that happens when you develop new solution with the client, but when you do digital transformation, is not that you have already something, a digital twin that can help these processes to work, but usually you need to customize or even develop a new product. So we had another client that asked us, for example, to monitor its mold when its mold were located to a third-party supplier. So imagine a manufacturing company who develop, for example, coffee machines. They assemble the coffee machine in the headquarters, but in the headquarter plant, of course. But all the little pieces of plastic that are used to manufacture the machine are made by third-party suppliers that receive a mold whose property of its mold is, of course, of the manufacturer. But when the manufacturer sends the mold to the third-party clients, he completely loses the vision of what happened on its mold. And of course, the mold is used by a third-party supplier, but all the intellectual property must be protected. So in this case, the client say, when our mold is at the third-party supplier facility, we want to gather data. So we develop this little box plug and play that you attach to the mold. This work with NB IoT narrowband IoT protocol and send you all the information you need to understand how the mold is working at the third-party supplier. The idea was quite good. Let me say nothing so new, but the client didn't find something that was okay for him on the market, and so asked us to develop it custom for him. When we developed and we were ready to start testing and to scale up the solution to all the of the client, of course, the client asked us another quite difficult question to answer, and was, did you use any intellectual property of other parties to create this little box? And for example, on this case, we have to run a freedom to operate that showed, for example, in this case, that the solution was not patentable, and all the technology that we use were technology that you can find easily, let me say, that an engineer, a mechanical engineer, an electronic engineer that know how to do his job can run and use. But because the problem of this client was that he needed, in order to scale up the project, to have this freedom to operate communication from our lawyer in order to run the project. So what I want to underline is that for a startup that has all the typical problem of a startup excuse me, that I don't see you anymore. The typical problem of a startup to deal with, life becomes even more difficult, because all of these issues that we are discussing today are becoming super important, and the clients expect you to have all the, let me say, the knowledge to manage that. So I really think that this is something that we have to debate and discuss. I say my industry, so the startup that work in developing software, we have all developers, we don't have lawyers, or we don't have this deep sensibility on this type of issues. But,
thank you, Carlo. It is very interesting. Sorry for interrupting you, but
please, sorry.
It was very interesting. You also share some cases that are very relevant for these topics, and then I know that is the perspective of also of the startup is very interesting. Can you stop your sharing if you don't mind?
Yeah, I'm trying to start up, but not to use.
Okay, so yeah. I think I can do for you, but
no, it should be okay now.
So now I want to go on, because we have. I want to leave all the floor to our speakers. I want just to ask John Whelam, because we had this all this perspective from the business and the business to business customer, and what I'm interested now is to know the perspective and the peculiarities of the research to business approach, since you are working more on this topic, working with startup spin-off and ICT commercialization. Yeah. So maybe you can give us this.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly.
I promise you I'll be very quick. I really promise you. I know, Elisa, time is short. So yeah, as Elisa said, I work in a university in Dublin. So we do a lot of software licensing. And I wanted to really, I was changing my presentation when I was listening to other people speaking, and particularly to Margherita, because that was such a fantastic summary of IP licensing and software licensing. But there's three kind of important trends that I think we see in a university, a research organization, licensing to industry and collaborating with industry and licensing to our startups. The first one, and it's been mentioned, there was some very good points about open source in the chat questions. The importance of open source and software is critical. You know, they used to say that software is eating the world. Well, now open source is eating software. So it's a really important way of commercializing research. The other point is number two, patenting machine learning, artificial intelligence. The European Patent Office has been really innovative and supportive of patent allowing grants of patent applications in machine learning, so much so that the US Patent Office has actually followed them. So I can just mention that briefly. And of course, a really important point in machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learning, the algorithms are all free. The software is free. It's the data that is where the value is. And that's a really important point. So quickly, a unique thing we have in Ireland that's worth mentioning too is that we have the government has template software license agreement for any purpose that we can use when we're dealing with industry, because it gets so complicated dealing with industry that the government decided to step in and provide templates that we recommend, that are recommended to use. So that really helps, especially when you're dealing with big multinational companies. I have a case study here. I won't go into it, but you know, we do license open source. A lot of our spin-outs in software are based on open source business models. And this is one of them here, Terminus DB. I could talk about it in detail. We probably won't have time. This refers, you know, when you talk about open source, it gets complicated, but there's different types of open source. And there are really important restrictions on some types of open source from a commercial point of view. So you have to be very careful when you're down around using, you know, these copyleft options, GPL. You have important obligations that if you make any improvements to the software, you must distribute it to the community, back to the community. So that can really impact your business model. Database, I think databases are so important. Again, Margherita really stressed this, but there's a very interesting case study. Now it is in the UK, but the same case law was enforced. This is from the Court of Justice of the European Union, and it's to reinforce the point that databases are protected only if there is a major substantial effort in creating them. And in this case, the British Horse Racing Board produced a lot of data about horse racing, and it was being used by William Hill, a bookmaker, and the Horse Racing Board lost. It was a bit of surprise, but it was appealed. So it shows it's a gray area as to, you know, ownership of databases unless there is a substantial effort required in creating the data. This is the point I was making about data in machine learning. Machine learning is all built about the whole idea of pipelines. You know, you take the data, 90% of the problems in machine learning are getting access to data and cleaning the data and formatting it correctly, you know, reading, merging, pre-processing. The actual really clever stuff, the optimization, that's done all in open source software, and it's a matter of selecting the correct options that for the appropriate data. And then the application is how you display it. But data, without data, you cannot do machine learning. You have to train. The algorithm has to keep learning. So data is becoming increasingly important. Yeah, this is just emphasizing the point about patenting of artificial intelligence. This is on the website of the EPO. And it's only in the last 2 or 3 years, but they are clearly saying that patents may be granted when artificial intelligence leaves the abstract realm by applying it to solve a technical problem. So, you know, it's possible. The use of a neural network and heart monitoring apparatus, that's patentable. The classification of digital images, that's patentable. So that's a kind of a recent development in the last 2 years. I'll finish quickly by just talking about, you wanted some case studies of strange things. And by coincidence, this was an agreement across my desk yesterday only I was looking at. And this is, it shows how data definitions in licenses, this is where we are licensing in some data because we want to use it to train an algorithm to for some research, but it gets really confused. They're talking about derived data. You know, in this agreement, the license licensor says that they own their derived data, but when it's a very circular reference. It's just a kind of bad example, I think, and confusing example of how complex this can get. So that's me. I really wanted to keep the time. Elisa, I'll stop sharing, and I'm glad to talk about any of these points.
No, thank you very much also for being very in time, and I think you gave another perspective of with your definition, and also this is a good, beautiful example also of the templates that the government is doing to you and the aspect of machine learning. I want now to introduce also Maja Bogataj Jancic, that I want to put in evidence. Thank you, Maja. I just want to ask you, since you are also co-chair of Data Governance Working Group of the Global Partnership in AI, what is I ask you one question, but that is comprehensive, like comprehensive. I ask you to give us an overview of what are the now strategies and orientation at the EU level, and you also told to me that this is an important point related to data mining and the copyright related to this topic. So I think it's quite, very well connected to what John presented before. So I think this is a good kick for this discussion.
Thank you very much, Elisa. Of course, I could talk for another couple of hours. I will try to do my presentation in 5 minutes. And I'll try to do a couple of clear points that I want to really intervene on this, to put my perspective out there. So first of all, thank you for saying, yes, it's true. I'm a co-chair of Data Governance Working Group at the Data Governance Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, together with Jenny Tennyson from UK. And our mission is to work and to steer and to research and give feedback on how to best collect, archive, share data that would be in according to human rights, sustainable development goals. So basically we are doing or following the situation on very global perspective, or why data governance is important and why we should be focusing so much energy on this topic. And of course, when we talk about data governance in connection to artificial intelligence, why? Because data governance is the mother of artificial intelligence. Of course, artificial intelligence is more sexy. Everybody talks about this, but the case is about data and how we govern data. And that is a highlight. And I think that was also like the point that maybe Mr. John Whelan, Professor John Whelan was saying before, that data is what really matters. So without data, we also don't have artificial intelligence, or we don't have machine learning. So data is really important. And of course, the next question is, how do we manage rights in connection to data? The very important thing that we need to understand is the data, the information is public good. It is not protected by property. Data, even if it's personal data, even if it has tremendous value, it is not protected by intellectual property right. Data as such is public good. I mean, individuals, data subjects or persons can be data subjects and have rights. How can somebody access data? What can do with their data? But that's their privacy, that's their human rights, what can be done. But data as such is not protected by intellectual property right. That's the beginning. Of course, the second point is there are huge initiatives on global level taking place right now for the last couple of years, and there are huge players on international level to maybe in the future introduce new intellectual property right on data as such. I personally think that this is not the way forward, because even the data sharing is really fundamental that the European economy will move forward. It's not making walls and barriers around this, but to make effective environment that also small companies and small players, not just the big, huge companies that are basically overruling the world, will have access to data, will be able to share data, will be able to port data. That's really important starting point from my perspective. Of course, whoever would be talking in the name of Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon would probably have different perspective. And it's the first time in global history of World Intellectual Property Organization when this is discussed on global level, that America, which speaks in the name of their companies, and China on the other hand, are talking very similar language. So that's the second point. The third point is, which is probably demonstrated also today, that there are many levels about when we discuss intellectual property and data. One level is this global. Should we really need to build new economic model? That's like very, very global question. I started to address it at the beginning. And then more pragmatical question is, when you're in the business and you're doing, you're in charge of business model, and you need to govern data, whether you want access to data to train your systems or you want to protect your valuable data, then you try to use the existing rights that are out there to best, not enforce, to best govern your individual rights. And it's very, very difficult if you're in a position when you want to get access to data, or when you're in a position when you want to commercialize your data. I mean, at the beginning, even for the big players, they didn't want to share data. They just wanted to build business models around data. Maybe now we are in the phase when they will try to sell data. And my perspective is that building a new property right on data for the reason to expect the better economic outcome for society in general, it's probably not the way forward. The competition law will need to play a really important game. Whether really effective competition law is possible without property rights, that's another question. Some academics say that we need to build property system also to ensure strong access rights, to ensure strong rights that the data can be shared. But as a starting point, the current debate on the global level, whether we need a new intellectual property rights for the owner, for not the owners of data, the holders of data, because they keep it to themselves, my perspective is no way. But now I will not continue in this direction. Now I want to finish with one important highlight, which is when researchers and also companies are in position that they want access to data, many times they are faced with legal barriers. I will not speak about privacy law, but I will speak about intellectual property laws, especially copyright laws, that sometimes build barrier and prohibit users, let's put it this way, to be able to use data that is as well as content. It is across the Atlantic in the United States or in Japan, they have fair use rights or exceptions that enable researchers and companies to access to data and use this data. In Europe, the copyright directive established a mandatory exception for text and data mining. And of course, it's really essential that this exception is implemented very well in the national legislation. I will now speak for Slovenia because it's currently in the process of implementation of this exception for text and data mining. On global level, GPay proposed that we should work on the global exception for text and data mining, but now we are in Europe and more particularly in Slovenia and in this region. I don't know how Italy implemented this exception, but researchers and companies here in Slovenia really addressed the Ministry of Commerce how this should be implemented. And it's really we would think that because artificial intelligence is so important for the future development, that the legislator will say, oh, sure, we will do the environment that will be safe for what you do, and that will enable researchers and others to do what is done. Of course, on the other side, the copyright holders who have copyright on the content do not speak this language. So there is a huge clash of interests. On one way, researchers who want to do text and data mining, or companies who want to do text and data mining, and on the other hand, owners of content, of sui generis databases, or of content that researchers want to mine. What they want to mine library, they want to archive, they want to mine gallery. And those copyright holders, of course, they probably expected some collection of remuneration for this, and this will obviously not happen, and will try to block, if not by law, but by technical barriers, that this will not make possible. So I'm constantly watching the time and do not want to put any additional pressure on you, Elisa. So the resume, many things are happening at the same time. The global economic system is changing, the laws are changing, and at the same time, of course, companies and also researchers need to protect their business model or commercialize their business model. So many times, whoever is consulting to the companies is sometimes even needs to know technology, needs to understand the processes, but it's sometimes also like advising on something that he or she knows that will change. I'm many times in this position. And for the end and critique for my colleagues, I'm intellectual property lawyer specialized in copyright, but I'm doing consultancy in research. Many lawyers who are practitioners would of course go and pursue the path of protecting or enforcing the business model with IP. This is not always the correct way forward to increase value in this new economic reality. So it's of course open software, open licenses, and sometimes also saying and insisting data is public good, it's in public domain. We're seeing that maybe the patenting the result of artificial intelligence or protecting by copyright the result of artificial intelligence, that's another topic. It's not the most beneficial for society. So we are in the middle of heated debate and trying to solve models of individuals players. Intellectual property is complex and it's extremely delicate also from economic political point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Maja, also for giving us this insight on some ethics aspects that are very relevant on the use the data as a public public value, so public property, so something that is very, very important, because as you told, that there is something that is changing, we have to follow this changing for the common good. So I really like your observation. We personally feel and follow what you are saying, and we think this is very interesting. So we have ended the time, but I want to end with Romana because I left her before since she had some example to share. So if you want, Romana, in 5 minutes, share your examples, it would be very great. And because we had some example from Carlo and also from John, but we want to hear also for you. And Giovanni left us, but he also gave some very good insight on what are the cases from their point of view.
Good. Tell me if you see Original Plus, the website.
I can, no, Original Plus, yes.
Original Plus, okay. Just a small example of an interesting IP management strategy. That's Original Plus. It's a startup from Salzburg in the skiing, from the skiing industry. Well, the time is coming. Hopefully we can do skiing this year again. Original Plus is really interesting. It's not a normal skiing production. It's where can you about Original Plus? Here you can see it a little bit better. Okay, my link doesn't function. Okay, it's a combination. They develop with an AI company from Salzburg. It's Fact AI, a special configurator where the people can configure their own customized ski. Yeah, out of 600 relevant things and featured. Like I'm just a skier. Like torsion, binding, the weight, and so on. And they produce your personal ski. And which is very interesting is they have many bricks around their innovation. They have the data. Thank you, Maja, for this speech. That's true. They need the data for getting better to do the more and better customized skis. They have a patent on the technical issues. They have a trademark, Original Plus, and they have a special design. You can see it here. When you put together the two skis, it's a plus and an O. Yeah. And also in special, all these different things around. As you see, it's not just one thing you can protect. It's a mixture, and I think that's a successful company, and that you can have as a best practice. It's really interesting to have these different things and tools matching perfectly together. It's a kind of black box with the data and other registered features around it. That's small, but very nice to show. Okay, where can I close down my sharing? Can you help me?
I can do for you if you want.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, and yes, this is very interesting also, as because you covered a lot of things that can be protected, starting from the name, trend, brand, data, and everything. So I think today we had very interesting views of how the data and softwares and digital IP can be really protected, used, managed, and exploited in and what are the main barriers and cases. So I think we could have these very nice overviews. And I want really to thank all of you for your time. We could have the second questions, but I think most of you has already presented the cases. So you were very good. You were very great to put everything together in your presentation. So I think also the people in the audience really appreciated this. I know that John answered already questions in the chat. We have another one, I think, for Maja, but she also answered this because...
No, I'm here.
Yes, but I think you answered without reading it, because they are asking if, in this case, GDPR will put in a less competitive position versus the US, for example, and
no, it will actually put Europe in more advantaged position, because GDPR is now a global standard, and it's higher protection of privacy and human rights. It's not making innovations less effective. Of course, it's a burden for small companies to now follow GDPR, but the long term, this is the way to go forward. And it's not just Europe who is practicing this now. This is a global standard. So America is talking about that. Other countries are talking about that. China is, of course, not talking about that, but that's another issue. But it's seen as advantage. So we need to go forward regarding that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I think we can close this part here. I remember that everything is registered, so I will send you the registration after that. If you have questions, I ask you to do this on the Wevox, and so we will try also to ask our great speakers if they can help us to to answer also offline to some of the questions that may arise from this. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I think we can have a very short break before starting the workshop. And during this break, I ask you a couple of questions on Vevox. So we will be back in, I think, 5 minutes. We will start. We are a little late, but I think it was worth to go a little over because the speakers were very interesting. So the speech were very interesting and very fitting with the topic of today. So I ask you to go in the Vevox. I just to break a little bit and to make your more comfort with Vevox, I will ask a couple of questions and you can see, you can use your smartphone or the browser on the computer and then connect and ask these questions for you. I'm sorry, this is the second one, but it's okay. So you have a couple of minutes if you want to share. There you have all the data to join. I can see just only 9 out of 31, so maybe you can join there and as well. And then in 2 minutes, I will stop the I'm doing that because after that, during the workshop, we will use a little bit Vevox for a couple of questions. So it's better if you are inside and well aware of what you are doing and how to use it. So I have 12. Go. Three answers. You just have to write a word and not so. Okay, I think I can stop here and then so we have some word here and so some loose data control. Yes, I know that we have to write just one word, so it's good that you put everything together. Product, indemnity, liability, infringing. Should. So that's great. So I think I will stop sharing my screen, and in a couple of minutes we will start with the second part that will last more or less 1 hour. So we can be a little late, but we can start with the part of the workshop that is more practical one. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Elisa. Can we start with the?
Yes, I think we can. Yes.
Okay. So maybe you should stop the sharing of.
I see. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Well. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So in the second part of our meeting, I would like to work with you, with all the hosts and the present on the structure of some important contracts related to the exploitation of intellectual property rights on digital and new technologies. One of the contract that I would like to face today is the technology transfer agreement. The technology transfer agreements concern the licensing of technologies, where the licensor, who is usually the owner of the technology, permits to the licensee, the receiving part of the technology, to exploit the licensed technology for the production of goods or services, but also to implement a research, for instance. This contract is used when a company assigns or licenses to another, usually a registered industrial or intellectual property rights, but also his know-how or technical assistance and training. The technology transfer agreements are increasingly being used for the production of goods or services, as I has already said, but also in technological cooperation strategies, where there are, for instance, more partners who share each other their respective technologies, for instance, to participate to a project together. The parties of a technology transfer agreement could be, for instance, two companies. In this case, the contract would be a B2B contract, but the technology transfer could be also from the researcher to the company, and also from the university to the company. It is increasingly common that the university, for instance, uses some company to exploit their intellectual property in order to find possible interested partner to exploit the technology developed within the university. The technology transfer agreement has as object a license, the granting of a license for patent, software, know-how, or design, usually, but also for data, for instance, databases could be the object of a technology transfer. The technology transfer agreement should contain a clause to identify the territories where the license is effective. Before I see that I didn't answer to a question related to the possibility to license a patent in the territories where such patent has not been registered. Well, the patents are protected only in the territories where the patent application has been filed. So, for instance, in a technology transfer agreement, which has as object a patent, the patent could be licensed only in the territories where the patent has been registered. Well, the patent could be a license for a patent could be granted also in territories where the patent has not been registered. But the consequence is that third parties, competitors, for instance, could implement the invention too. So only where the patent has been registered, the licensee has the right to prevent third party from implementing such invention. This is the difference. So also for different technology different from the patent, for instance, database, software, know-how, it is very important in the contract to establish the territories where the license is granted. The license, in fact, could be exclusive or non-exclusive. Usually, the exclusive license covers all territories, It means that the receiving part could implement the licensed technology all over the world, but a technology transfer agreement could be also non-exclusive. It means, for instance, that there will be different receiving parties for different territories. The technology transfer agreement, of course, should have also a duration. The duration could be chosen by the parties, of course, and could be the same of the protection of the intellectual properties that are licensed. So, for instance, the parties could provide that the technology transfer agreement lasts for all the duration of the intellectual property granted. So, for instance, if the database we have said before is protected for 15 years, the technology transfer agreement could provide the same duration for the license. But, for instance, the technology transfer agreement could provide also a different duration, a less duration, for instance, 1 year with the possibility to renew the agreement. How choose the duration? Well, it is important to take into consideration the reliability of the receiving party. For instance, if the granting party, the license or the owner of the technology would obtain some gain, for instance, from the technology transfer agreement, would obtain some royalties, well, it is better to provide a smaller duration, like 1 year, 2 years, in order to verify which is the reaction of the market. If the granting part, for instance, will not develop a market, it is better that the technology transfer agreement will end earlier, in order to find another granting party which have the capacity to develop the market for such technology, for instance. If the receiving party, of course, has an obligation to develop the market, because the technology transfer agreement could also be entered into just for research's purpose and not for commercial purpose, for instance. I would like to ask to Elisa to share another question for you, for the participants, in order to understand which is, in your opinion, the major risk in technology transfer if you are the licensing part. So if you are, for instance, the owner of the technology. If you are the licensing part, the owner of the technology, do you think that the worst risk is the failure in receiving the agreed payment from the receiving part, or the worst risk is the disclosure of confidential information or trade secrets related to the technology? Or do you think that the worst risk is the difficulty in obtaining the technology back in case of early termination of contract? While you are answering, I would like to focus your attention on maybe normal issues, the following. The contract clauses depends on the power of negotiation of the two parties, because the licensing part and the receiving part have, of course, some different interest. So, for instance, the licensing part would not be obliged to grant warranties on the existence and the function of the technology, whereas the receiving part, of course, would like the largest warranties possible. So all these contract, the clauses of this contract depends on the power of negotiation of each part. Elisa, can we see the answer?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
So nobody thinks that the risk is the failure in receiving the agreed payment. Well, the 20% think that the disclosure of confidential information is the worst risk, and 80% think that the real risk of licensing technology technology is the difficulty in obtaining the technology back in case of early termination of contract. It's very interesting. Then, please, Elisa, could you ask to our participants, in their opinion, which is the worst risk for the receiving part this time? So for the part that receive the technology, the licensee of the technology. The worst risk is difficult in implementing and use the technology. The risk to receiving complaint from third parties claiming the ownership of the technology, or the risk, the worst risk is the disclosing of confidential information or trade secrets. Wow, so the worst risk, in your opinion, for the receiving part is to receiving complaints from third parties claiming the ownership of the technology. Yeah, it is actually a risk. Then the disclosing confidential information or trade secrets to unauthorized parties and others. I kindly ask the participant who answer that the risks are other to explain which is the risk, in your opinion. Maybe in chat?
Or maybe you can switch on. Who answers others?
While the participant which answer others explain in chat, maybe I can share the screen and go ahead with the presentation, because I see that it's quite later.
I think we have a last question, Margherita, if it's right.
Okay, so okay, we can do it immediately. So the last question related to technology transfer agreement is, in your opinion, who should be the owner of the technology improvements? The part which has achieved the improvements without any obligation to disclose the improvements to the other party, or the part which has achieved the improvements which should be obliged to disclose the improvement to the other party? Or in any case, the owner of the technology improvement should be the licensing part, so the owner of the technology object of the transfer technology transfer agreement. Very, very interesting. 50-50, the part which has achieved the improvements, which should be or should not be obliged to disclose the improvement to the other party. Well, usually, in my daily experience, this is a type of clause which is very challenged between the parties because, of course, the licensing part has all the interest to be the owner also of the improvements, or at least to receive the information about this improvement, which are usually achieved by the receiving part, which improve the technology. So usually is the receiving part which, for instance, produce the product with the technology granted, and so it has more chances to obtain such improvement by using the technology. Well, I go back to my presentation. We can see here some important clauses which should be provided in technology transfer agreement. First of all, the contract should regulate the training and the document delivery. It is important for the receiving part to obtain all the information, the know-how, the documents, the data regarding the technology in order to improve the technology. Nobody thinks in our questionnaire, nobody thinks that the worst risk of a technology transfer agreement is to have difficulties in implementing the technology. Actually, in the daily work life, it is one of the most issues for the receiving part, which has not the ability to implement the technology, but sometimes it is the granting part, the licensor, who does not transfer all the necessary information. Then it is very important, of course, to agree about the price. The price in technology transfer agreement could be a certain fixed amount of money, but it could be also a percentage calculated on the amount of the sale of the product under license, for instance. This percentage is called royalties. But the price could be agreed in both ways, initially by a certain fixed amount, and during the term of the agreement as a royalties, for instance. It is important to provide some additional fees for technical assistance and services, which should be paid individually for each service rendered. It happened very frequently in the daily work that, as I said before, the receiving part has not the ability to implement the technology, to use the technology, and so often asks to the granting part some help or some technical assistance in order to improve the technology. It is important to provide in the contract if this training phase or if the technical assistance services should be paid individually or not. Then we have seen the questionnaire, the question of the improvements of the technology. The improvements, if are achieved by the receiving part, belongs to the receiving part, but the contract could provide a duty to disclose such improvement to the licensing part. Of course, also in this case, the interest of the two parts are very different, because the receiving part has maybe the interest to keep secret these improvements in order to not disclose them with the licensing part, which could be could implement the technology and license the technology and the improvements to third party, for instance, which could be competitor of the receiving part. But the improvement could also be achieved by the licensing part, which maybe could still advance with the research on the technology, even if the technology is still licensed to third parties. In this case, in the contract, it is important to provide the duty of the licensing part to grant a license to the licensing, to the receiving part, also on the improvement. This is also a possible reason to dispute between the party of this kind of contracts, because the receiving part claims the possibility to use also the improvement which the licensing part achieved after the signature of the contract. So the licensing part on your side should provide a supplementary fee in the contract to license also the improvements. Because of course, as you can imagine, all the dispute arise for economic reasons. So from one side, the receiving part pretend to use the improvement and pretend to consider the improvements covered by the fixed amount or the royalties established at the moment of the signature, whereas on her side, the licensing part pretend a supplementary fee in order to grant a license also on the improvements. So this is an aspect that should be regulated at the moment of the signature of the contract. The most part of you answered to the questionnaire that the worst risk for the licensing part in technology transfer agreement is to receive claims by third party claiming the ownership of the technology. So third party could, for instance, file a pursuit against the licensing part, claiming the infringing of the technology. In order to prevent this risk, it is very important for the licensing part to provide in the contract a right to be indemnified and to be kept harmless from and against any losses, damages, or liabilities arising from, as a result of, or in connection with any claims based on industrial and commercial feasibility, usefulness, or completeness of the technology. So very important are the representation and warranties clause. But it is important for the licensing part also to obtain a representation and a warranties related to the existence, the validity and the enforceability of the technology, and in general of any industrial property related to the technology transfer agreement. In this case, to mitigate the risk, the company should provide in the contract the right to early terminate the agreement in case the technology, maybe a patented technology, would be considered as invalid. The case, you can think about the case of a patent, for instance. The patent could be considered or declared invalid by the judicial authorities of a country. In this case, the company, the licensing part receiving the license on the patent, should have the right to terminate the agreement in this case, because of course the company, which is the licensing part in this case, has no interest in still paying the royalties for a technology which is not anymore patented, with a technology which everybody could use, because of course if a patent is declared invalid, well, since the day of the judicial decision, everybody could use the invention. So why the company should still pay for an invention becoming public? I forget to see you that in order to obtain a representation and a warranties about the ownership of the technology, in addition to the representation and the warranties of the ownership of the technology, the company, which is the licensing part, should provide the right to be indemnified from the granting part, but could also pretend a freedom to operate. The freedom to operate, Carlo Pasqualetto mentioned it before, is a declaration made by a counselor, a patent attorney, who declare that the technology which not infringe any previous patent. In this case, the patent attorney, the counselor, make a research in the patent database, and he compare the previous patent with the technology, and he can say that the technology does not infringe any of the previous patent. This is a declaration which the licensing part could pretend from, that the receiving part could pretend from the licensing part, in order to mitigate the risk that all of you consider the worst risk. Then some of you think that the worst risk in technology transfer is the disclosure of confidential information. Well, it is necessary to provide in this kind of agreement a confidentiality clause. Here you have an example of the standard clause of confidentiality, where each parties shall keep the confidential information confidential, of course. It is important to define in the contract the confidential information. The problem of this kind of clause is often that there is no definition of confidential information, and so the clause is too generic to be enforceable. It is important regarding the confidential issues to provide that the confidentiality obligation under the agreement should survive for a certain period, for instance, 5 years after the termination of the agreement. It is also very important to provide this clause. Then another issue which nobody thinks about is the legal defense of the technology. What usually happens is that third parties infringe the technologies in the territories where the technologies has been licensed to a receiving part. In this case, who has the right or the obligation to file a pursuit against the counterfeiter? It depends on the contracts, but I have seen in my experience that sometimes the receiving part could not file a pursuit against the infringer because the contract does not give such rights. And in this case, it could be happen that the licensing part would not file the pursuit, and therefore the receiving part remain without the possibility to act against the infringement of the technology. It is very important to regulate this profile in the contract. Well, in case of exclusive license, the receiving part could file a pursuit by default. It is the law which grants to the exclusive licensee the right to file a pursuit against the technology infringers. But in case of non-exclusive license, such right should be provided expressly. So, for instance, it is necessary to provide the right of the receiving part to file pursuit against counterfeiter, and also it is important to provide who should suffer the legal fee of the pursuit. In this kind of contract, it is very important also to provide an early termination clause. As I stated before, the technology transfer duration could be parametrated to the duration of the intellectual property right which is licensed. But it is important to provide some possibility, mainly in the interest of the licensing part, to early terminate the agreement. Usually the early termination of the agreement could be subject to a lack of payment of the royalties, for instance, to the breach of confidential information and obligation, to the lack of training. In this case, of course, the early termination would be in the interest of the receiving part. Or, for instance, again, in the interest of the receiving part, the early termination could be subject to the invalidity or the unfeasibility of the technology. It is the case, for instance, in which the patent could be declared invalid in a territory. For this territory, the contract should be deemed terminated. Another important clause in the technology transfer agreement is the clause related to jurisdiction and applicable law. Usually in the so-called homemade contracts made by, for instance, the company which do not ask to a lawyer or a specialist for the contract, the national law is provided as the law which governs the contract. Well, it is not always the best choice, because it is important to consider, for instance, if other national law, so the national law of the receiving part or the licensing part, are more favorable regarding some kind of rights. It is very important also to provide the jurisdiction, so the judicial authority which will be competent to know about the possible dispute arising between the parties. In this case, again, usually each part try to provide the national jurisdiction. Well, the choice depends on the possible problems which could arise from the contract. So in order to choose the jurisdiction and the applicable law, it is very important to foresee the possible problems. So, for instance, if I am the granting party, the licensor, why I should file a pursuit against the licensee? Maybe because of a lack of payment. If the licensee does not pay the royalties, the owner of the technology, I should file a pursuit against the licensee to obtain the payment. Well, in this case, it is better for me to file this pursuit before the jurisdiction of the licensee, because in this way it is very easier for me to obtain a decision which is enforceable against the licensee. Whereas if maybe I will file this kind of pursuit before my jurisdiction, well, it is possible that the final decision will not be enforceable in the territories where is the licensee. So this kind of clauses are very, very important. If the technology transfer agreement is an international agreement, I suggest also to consider the possibility to provide an arbitration clause. So to provide the possibility for the parties to submit the possible dispute to third authorities different from the national judges, third authorities which will give a decision faster and maybe with which will be more competent regarding the specific issues of the dispute. For instance, the dispute could be submitted before the International Chamber of Commerce, which is an organism, an administration which provides this kind of services, the dispute resolution, the so-called alternative dispute resolution. Well, I've finished the part related to the technology transfer agreement. I would have the service agreement for software development and cloud computing, but I think that the timing is ended, that is finished. I don't know, Elisa and Stefano, what do you think?
Do you want, sorry. So I think that if people can stay some minutes more, if you can just underline the most important part of the second topic, it's very important for us also. Okay, perfect. So this contract, the service agreement contract for the software development and for cloud computing are a mixed contracts which contain some provision related to software development or to cloud computing, and are often used for the digital transformation processes that we have faced before. So, for instance, in order to improve the after-sales services, a manufacturer asks to a provider to make its product smart in order to obtain all the relevant data regarding the use of such products made by the end user, but also data related to any possible malfunctions, the parameters of the products, etc. The manufacturer, of course, has all the interest, as we said before, to obtain all such data, because such data could be studied to implement, to improve the product in their future version. In this kind of project of digital transformation, there are actually different subjects involved. There are the producer, the manufacturer, which usually produce the product. Then there is the provider of the technological services. There is the end user, the end customers, who could, for instance, control remotely its product, and there is the intermediaries. So the people who keep the maintenance of the product, the installer, etc. All these subjects are involved in the digital transformation process in this kind of process, of course, because the smart products allow the end consumer to control remotely, for instance, allow the producer to know the status of the products, but allow also the intermediaries to know if it is necessary for them to make an intervention for the maintenance. The most relevant relationship, of course, is between the producer and the provider of the technological services. In this relationship, it is very important to pay attention on the software development to ensure the product connection and the data collection. It is very important to provide if the provider should implement a development and a training of the artificial intelligence, and the provider could be appointed to develop also a mobile app, for instance, for the access to the services by the customers or the intermediaries.
So usually the contract between the producer and the provider has three objects: software development, cloud computing, and the development of mobile app. In this kind of contract, it is very important regarding the cloud computing part to decide what data are collected, to whom does data belong, where are the data saved and stored. It is very important to regulate the intellectual property aspects. So who is the owner of the software and who is the owner of the system structure? How to access to source code of the software. It is very important to provide warranties about the continuity of services. So how to ensure continuity of services in the event of a change of a provider. And it is very important to provide the standard and guarantees clause in order to point it out which kind of standard must be guaranteed. In this case, the parts of the service agreement could be, again, business to business, research to business, if the provider is a researcher, university business, if the provider is a university, but also employer, if the software is developed by an employee. So without outsource this activity. Okay. Also for this kind of agreement, it's very important to provide the duration, but the most important thing to provide in this kind of agreement is the software and in general the system ownership, because it happens very often in the daily life that the manufacturer, for instance, does not have the source code of the software which manage all the production phase or the after sale services. In this case, it's very important for the producer to provide a way to have access to this source code in order to guarantee the continuity of services. You can imagine that if you are the producers and you do not have the source code of the system, if for each kind of reasons the provider disappeared, how can you provide the services? To avoid this risk, in this kind of contracts, there is a sort of escrow agreement. The escrow agreement is a contract in which one or more assets, usually the source code of the software, are deposited as security in the hands of a third party independent from the parties of the contracts. Usually, in this case, the contract, the software development contract, provide the hypothesis in which the party could have access to such source code which are deposited before a third party. As I stated before, this kind of contracts provide some cloud computing services. And in this case, it is very important to decide where the data are stored, if in Europe or out of Europe, in which kind of services, where the copy of backup should be saved, the maintenance work, etc. It is important to understand then that in such kind of project, there is a contractual relations also between the producer and the end user, the end consumer of the smart product. of course, between these two parts entered into a purchase agreement. The end customer buy the products, very normal and usual. But there is also another contractual relationship between these two parties, and it is usually an end user licenses for the use of the mobile app. Usually in these cases, maybe every one of us has in its mobile phone an application to remotely turn off or turn on some products that we have at home. In this case, we usually accept some terms and conditions of this mobile application. So in this kind of project, the producer should take care about, of course, the contract with the provider of the software, but also he should take care of the contract with the end customer, and so the app license. Here you can find the terms and condition of the app. I just would like to focus on a related argument of this meeting, which is the personal data. As I anticipated, we are not focusing on personal data during this afternoon, but of course in this kind of projects of digitalization, it is not possible to not speak about personal data. In the case of smart products, of course, the producer knows a lot of data about the end consumer. So it is very important also to provide the privacy policy, etc. And it is also important to understand that if the installer or the worker who give the maintenance services is acknowledge some personal data, it should be also be compliant with GDPR, and he must be appointed as a data controller or as external manager pursuant to the GDPR European regulation. I think to have given you a very quick overview about this kind of relationship. I would like to end this intervention with this slide again, because I think that this slide could show you all the relationship we are involved in a project of digitalization like the one that, for instance, Carlo Pasqualetto described before. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm at your disposal for any question. I'm sorry if the time is ended, but I think it has been a very intensive afternoon.
Yes, thank you very much, Margherita. It was very great to hear you and these clauses and your experience on this topic. I hope that the audience would found this very interesting. It's very technical, but for the person that are working on this topic is very important to know all this aspect. So finally, we could conclude with 15 minutes of delay, but I think it was worth it. We received a lot of information, a lot of inputs, a lot of perspectives. So it was very great to have all these participants here, and also you, Margherita, because your experience is very valuable for all of us and for the people that are working on this topic. And we will have the registration soon, and I think with the post-processing we will share it with all of you, and so you can have this review this and then learn even more. And I hope, Margherita, we can share also your presentation, or just let us know in which form we can share it. And finally, I want just to remember you that we have these other two meetings that are on the 26th and the 27th. You can find, I send out to all of you, you will receive from Eventbrite a reminder and an invitation to the other, I think you received it yet, but you will receive it again. And I kindly ask you, the next meeting will be that is more on the legal aspect of IP agreements, of digital IP and data, will be organized by the Innosquare, our partners, and you can see Michael and Pascal that are here participating. And the last one with about exploitation of digital IP and data is organized by Jožef and Stefan Institute, the third part of the project. I thank you very much. You can continue, you can send if you want questions, if you have doubts, you can send it to me or sorry, and we will try to answer to all your questions you may have. And finally, I ask you to use the QR code or the links that you will receive to evaluate this workshop. This will be very useful to know your impression, also to organize the last few meetings. So thank you all. I don't know if Michael want to introduce the next one just in 1 minute.
Yeah, it's just very short. Actually, first of all, I wanted to thank you for the amazing job that you have done, and thank all the speakers for their interesting contributions, and just confirm that next week there will be the next meeting, and we will in particular have the pleasure to welcome an expert from the World Intellectual Property Organization that will present a brand new tool that they have developed, an online IP diagnostic tool for companies that they will actually show in the workshop. So if you're interested in participating in this and getting a live and real world insight into this brand new tool, you're more than welcome to join the workshop next week. Also for companies, if you would like to take a look at this, how this tool works and have access directly to the experts that have developed this tool, this will be your opportunity next week. So we would be very pleased to welcome you also next week. And yeah, thank you for this afternoon, and see you soon.